The stagecoach lurched violently through the blinding white wall of snow, and Rebecca Hartford pressed her gloved hands against the frosted window, wondering if she had made the greatest mistake of her life by leaving Boston for a man she had never met. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling the wooden frame until she feared it would splinter apart and scatter her bones across the Nevada desert that now lay buried beneath feet of unprecedented snow. She clutched the leather satchel containing all her worldly possessions and the carefully preserved letters from Warren Foster, the rancher who had promised her a home, a future, and perhaps even love in the remote town of Cherry Creek. The year was 1883, and Rebecca had turned 22 just 3 weeks before boarding the train that would carry her west from everything she had ever known. Her father had died the previous winter, leaving behind nothing but debts and a small boarding house that barely covered the cost of coal to heat it. Her mother had passed when she was just a girl, and with no siblings and no prospects for marriage among Boston's dwindling eligible men, the advertisement in the matrimonial newspaper had seemed like divine intervention. Rancher in Cherry Creek, Nevada, seeks respectable woman for marriage, must be of good character, willing to work hard, and prepared for the challenges of frontier life. Companionship and security offered in return. The words had been simple, almost stark, but the letters that followed had revealed a thoughtful man with a dry sense of humor and a deep loneliness that matched her own. Warren wrote about his ranch, the mountains that turned purple at sunset, the cattle that grazed on scrubland that somehow sustained them, and the life he was building with his own 2 hands. He wrote about wanting a partner, not just a housekeeper, and children who would inherit the land he was fighting to tame. Rebecca had sent her photograph and received his in return. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way, with strong features and eyes that looked steady even in the sepia tones of the portrait. His jaw was firm, his shoulders broad beneath a simple shirt and vest, and there was something in the set of his mouth that suggested both determination and kindness. She had studied that photograph for hours, trying to imagine what it would be like to stand beside this stranger and promise to love him for the rest of her days. Now, as the stagecoach driver shouted something unintelligible over the roar of the storm, Rebecca wondered if she would even survive long enough to meet him. The blizzard had descended without warning, transforming the Nevada landscape into something unrecognizable. The driver had insisted they press on, confident they could reach Cherry Creek before the worst of it hit, but he had been catastrophically wrong. The coach suddenly tilted at a sickening angle, throwing Rebecca against the side wall. She heard the horses scream in panic, heard the driver cursing, and then everything was motion and chaos as the coach tipped completely over onto its side. Rebecca hit her head hard enough to see stars and her belongings scattered around her in the cramped space. The window she had been looking through was now above her, showing nothing but swirling white. For a moment, she just lay there, dazed and struggling to breathe. Then the cold began to seep in through the broken boards, and fear cut through the fog in her mind. She called out, but the wind swallowed her voice. She tried to push herself up, but pain lanced through her left ankle, and she cried out. The driver did not answer her calls. The coach had gone utterly silent except for the relentless howl of the storm. Rebecca pulled herself up despite the pain, reaching for the door that was now overhead. It was jammed, the wood swollen, or the hinges bent from the crash. She pushed with all her strength, panic rising in her chest like floodwater. The cold was already numbing her fingers, and she could feel the temperature dropping with every passing second. "Help!" she screamed, though she knew it was futile. They were miles from anywhere, and in this storm no one would be out searching. She would freeze to death in this overturned cage, would die before ever seeing Warren Foster's face or touching the Nevada soil she had traveled so far to call home. The injustice of it made her want to weep, but she was too cold for tears, too frightened to give in to despair just yet. She kept pushing at the door, kept calling for help, even as snow began to drift through the cracks in the coach's walls. Her fingers were losing feeling, her breath coming in visible clouds, and the pain in her ankle had faded to a distant throb that somehow seemed worse than the sharp agony. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats, muffled by snow but unmistakable. A horse, moving through the storm. Rebecca renewed her efforts, slamming her shoulder against the door and shouting until her throat was raw. The hoofbeats grew closer, then stopped. She heard a man's voice, deep and commanding, speaking to his horse. "Hello," she screamed. "I am trapped. Please help me." Heavy footsteps crunched through snow, and then a face appeared at the tilted window above her. A man. His features barely visible beneath a hat weighted with snow and a bandana pulled up over his nose and mouth. But his eyes were visible, and they were the same eyes from the photograph she had memorized, gray, blue, and steady even in the midst of the storm. "Warren?" she gasped. Recognition flashed in those eyes, followed by something that might have been relief or shock or both. "Rebecca Hartford?" His voice was rough from the cold, but she could hear the disbelief in it. "Hold on, I will get you out." He disappeared from view, and she heard him moving around the coach, testing the doors, assessing the damage. When he returned to the window, he had cleared away some of the snow. "The doors are jammed. I'm going to break through the window. Cover your face." Rebecca turned away and shielded herself with her arms as the sound of breaking glass cut through the storm. Cold air rushed in, so frigid it burned her lungs, but then Warren's hands were reaching through, finding her shoulders, her arms. "Can you stand?" he asked. "My ankle," she said. "I think it might be broken." He did not waste time with sympathy or questions. "I'm going to pull you up and out. It will hurt. I am sorry for that, but we need to move quickly. This storm is only getting worse and you are already half frozen." Rebecca nodded, bracing herself. Warren's hands were strong and sure as they gripped her beneath her arms. The pain in her ankle flared white-hot as he lifted her, and she could not suppress a cry, but he did not stop. With surprising strength, he pulled her up through the window opening and out into the full fury of the blizzard. The wind hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and blinding her with snow. Warren did not set her down on her injured ankle. Instead, in one smooth motion, he swept her up into his arms and held her against his chest. Even through the layers of coats and clothes, she could feel the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "The driver?" she managed to ask, her words nearly lost in the wind. "Dead," Warren said bluntly, his mouth close to her ear so she could hear him. "Broke his neck in the crash. There is nothing to be done for him now, and we will both join him if we do not get to shelter. My ranch is 3 miles south. Can you hold on to me?" Rebecca wrapped her arms around his neck and nodded against his shoulder. Warren carried her through the deep snow to where his horse waited, a massive bay gelding that stood solid despite the storm. Getting into the saddle while carrying her seemed impossible, but Warren managed it with a horseman's grace, settling her sideways across his lap and wrapping his coat around her as much as possible. "Keep your face against my chest," he instructed. "Do not try to look up. The wind will freeze your eyes." He urged the horse forward, and they plunged into the white void. Rebecca did as she was told, pressing her face into the rough wool of Warren's coat and focusing on breathing, on staying conscious, on the warmth of his body that seemed like the only real thing in a world gone mad with cold and wind. She could feel the horse's labored breathing, the way it struggled through drifts that must have been chest deep. She could feel Warren's arms around her, one holding her secure while the other managed the reins with practiced ease. Time became meaningless. There was only cold and motion and the desperate hope that Warren knew where he was going, that he could find his way through a storm that had erased every landmark. Rebecca's thoughts grew sluggish, her body heavy. The cold had seeped into her bones, and the temptation to close her eyes and sleep was almost overwhelming. "Stay awake," Warren commanded, his voice cutting through her daze. "Talk to me, Rebecca. Tell me about Boston." She forced her frozen lips to move. Cold there too, but different. Buildings, streets, people everywhere. Do you miss it?" His question surprised her with its directness. "No," she answered, and realized it was true even in the midst of this nightmare. "Nothing left for me there, only debts and memories." She felt rather than heard his grunt of understanding. The horse stumbled, nearly going down, and Warren's arms tightened around her as he kept them both in the saddle. He spoke to the animal in a low, steady voice, encouraging it, praising it, promising it a warm barn and all the oats it could eat. "Tell me about the ranch," Rebecca said, fighting to stay conscious, to keep talking as he had commanded. "Small," Warren said. 200 acres. Got a house, not fancy but solid, built it myself. Barn for the horses and 20 head of cattle. Got a well that runs good even in summer. Garden patch that your letter said you know something about. Creek running through the east pasture, frozen solid right now, but usually full of trout." His words painted pictures in her mind, gave her something to focus on beyond the cold. "Chickens?" she asked. 6 hens and a rooster mean as sin. You will probably want to cook him first chance you get." Despite everything, Rebecca felt her lips try to curve into a smile. "I might." "Good, Ma," Warren said, and she heard approval in his voice. "A woman who knows when to kill a troublesome rooster is a woman who will survive out here." They fell silent after that, all of Warren's concentration focused on guiding his horse through the blinding storm. Rebecca drifted, not quite asleep, but not fully aware, her body surrendering to the cold even as some deep part of her mind refused to let go entirely. She had come too far, risked too much, to die now in the arms of a man she had only just met. When Warren finally spoke again, his voice held relief. "There, the fence line. We are almost home." Rebecca tried to lift her head but could not manage it. Her body would not respond to her commands anymore, the cold having stolen her strength and her will. She felt the horse's gait change as they moved into some kind of shelter from the wind, heard the creak of a door opening, and then they were inside somewhere darker and marginally warmer. Warren dismounted with her still in his arms, barking orders to someone. A young voice answered, a boy or young man who took the horse's reins and promised to see to the animal. Warren was already moving, carrying Rebecca across what felt like an open space, and then through another door into blessed warmth. The change in temperature was so abrupt it hurt. Rebecca whimpered as sensation began returning to her frozen limbs, the pain of it worse than the cold had been. Warren laid her on something soft, a bed or sofa, and began stripping away her wet outer clothes with efficient, impersonal movements. "I need to check you for frostbite," he said, his voice all business now. "Your fingers, toes, face, ears. This will not be pleasant." Rebecca tried to nod, tried to tell him she understood, but her teeth were chattering too hard for speech. She lay there and let him work, too cold and exhausted to feel embarrassed as he removed her boots and stockings, examining her feet with careful attention. His hands were warm against her frozen skin, and everywhere he touched burned and ached. "No blackening," he said, more to himself than to her. "Good. Your toes are white in places, but I think we got you inside in time. Your hands are better, not as exposed. Face and ears will be fine." He disappeared and returned with blankets that smelled of cedar and wood smoke. He wrapped her in layers, tucking them around her with the same efficiency he had shown in everything else. Then he lifted her again, blankets and all, and settled into a chair near the fireplace with her cradled in his lap like a child. "I know this is not proper," he said quietly, "but you need body heat, and I am the warmest thing available. If you want to slap me later when you are thawed out, I will understand." Rebecca managed to shake her head slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved my life." "You are my intended bride," Warren said simply. "Of course I came looking for you. When the storm hit, I knew the stage would be in trouble. Took me 2 hours to find you, but I knew the route, knew where to search." His arms around her were strong and steady, his body heat seeping through the blankets to slowly warm her frozen core. Rebecca closed her eyes and let herself rest against him, too grateful for life and warmth to worry about propriety or the strangeness of being held by a man she had never actually spoken to before today. The driver, she said after a moment, he had a wife in Carson City. Someone should tell her. I will send word once the storm breaks, Warren promised, though it may be days before anyone can get through. This is the worst blizzard I have seen in the 10 years I have been in Nevada. Does this happen often? Rebecca asked, unable to keep the worry from her voice. No, Warren assured her. Usually we get cold, some snow in the mountains, but nothing like this. This is unusual, maybe once in a generation. They were quiet for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. Slowly, painfully, feeling returned to Rebecca's extremities. Her ankle throbbed with renewed intensity, and she could not suppress a gasp. Let me look at it, Warren said. He shifted her carefully, unwrapping enough of the blankets to access her injured ankle. His examination was thorough but gentle, his fingers probing the swollen joint with practiced care. Not broken, he announced. Badly sprained, but you will heal. I will wrap it once you are fully warmed up. You know medicine? Rebecca asked. Enough, Warren said. Out here, you learn to doctor yourself and your animals or you do not survive. I am no physician, but I can set a bone, stitch a wound, and treat most common ailments. Rebecca studied his face in the firelight, seeing it clearly for the first time. He was older than she had expected from his photograph, perhaps 30 or 32, with lines around his eyes and mouth that spoke of years spent squinting into sun and wind. His face was weathered and lean, his jaw covered with a few days' worth of dark stubble, but his eyes were kind, and his hands, for all their roughness and strength, had been gentle with her. You look different than your photograph, she said. A hint of something that might have been amusement flickered across his features. Older? Rougher? That photograph was taken 5 years ago, back when I still had reason to visit a studio in Carson City. I probably should have sent a more recent one, but it is the only one I have. No, Rebecca said. You look more real. The photograph was just an image. You are a person. Warren met her eyes and something passed between them, a moment of recognition that went beyond the strange circumstances of their meeting. You are not what I expected either, he said quietly. Your letters were proper, careful, but you swore in the stagecoach when I was pulling you out. Quite colorfully, if I recall correctly. Rebecca felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. I apologize. The pain was considerable, and I forgot myself. Do not apologize, Warren said, and this time there was definitely amusement in his voice. A woman who can swear when the situation calls for it is a woman who will not fall apart when a cow needs birthing at midnight or a cougar gets into the chicken coop. I appreciate honesty more than I appreciate delicate sensibilities. The tension Rebecca had been carrying since leaving Boston, the fear that she would not measure up to whatever expectations Warren had built from her carefully worded letters, began to ease slightly. I can be proper when the situation requires it, she said, but I will not pretend to be something I am not. My father was a merchant before his business failed, and I helped him with his accounts and his correspondence. I know my letters I can figure, and I am not afraid of hard work, but I'm also not a refined lady who will swoon at the sight of blood or burst into tears when things get difficult. Good, Warren said with evident satisfaction, because life out here gets difficult on a regular basis, and I need a partner who will not break under pressure. They fell silent again, but it was a more comfortable silence now, the kind that suggested the possibility of understanding rather than the awkwardness of strangers. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but inside the fire burned warm and steady. Rebecca's eyes grew heavy, the combination of warmth and exhaustion finally overwhelming her. Sleep, Warren said softly. You are safe now. I will watch over you. Rebecca wanted to protest that she should not sleep in his lap, that it was improper, that she should at least try to maintain some semblance of propriety. But her body had other ideas, and within moments she had surrendered to the darkness. When she woke, she was lying in a proper bed in a small room lit by early morning light filtering through a window covered in frost. The storm still raged outside, but its fury seemed diminished, the wind less insistent. Rebecca pushed herself up carefully, testing her ankle. It was swollen and painful, but Warren had been right about it not being broken. Someone had wrapped it in strips of clean cloth while she slept, and her clothes had been changed to a nightgown that was far too large for her. The door opened, and a young woman entered carrying a tray. She was perhaps 16 or 17, with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid and a face that held a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "You are awake," the girl said, setting the tray on the small table beside the bed. "I am Rosalie. I help Mr. Foster with the house and the cooking. He asked me to bring you breakfast and to help you with anything you need." "Thank you," Rebecca said, surprised by how grateful she was for another woman's presence. "Did Mr. Foster change my clothes?" Rosalie shook her head quickly. "No, madam, that was me. He would not have done that. He is a good man, very proper about such things. He carried you in here and then went to fetch me from my family's place. We live about a half-mile down the road. My pa and brothers work Mr. Foster's cattle with him." Rebecca relaxed slightly. "I see. Thank you for taking care of me. I am Rebecca Hartford. I suppose you know that I am meant to be Mr. Foster's bride." "Yes, madam," Rosalie said, her expression softening into something like sympathy. "The whole town has been talking about it for weeks. Mr. Foster is well liked, and everyone was curious about the woman who answered his advertisement." "What do they think?" Rebecca asked, then immediately wished she had not. It should not matter what a town full of strangers thought of her, but Rosalie answered honestly. "Most folks are hopeful. Mr. Foster has been alone since he came here 10 years ago. He works hard, helps his neighbors, never causes trouble. People think he deserves some happiness, and they figure any woman brave enough to come all this way to marry a man she has never met must have courage, and courage is what it takes to survive out here." Rebecca picked at the breakfast of eggs and biscuits, her appetite returning with the warmth and safety of the house. "How long has the storm been going?" 2 days now," Rosalie said. "Started the morning the stage was due to arrive. Mr. Foster was in town waiting for you, but when it did not come, and the storm started, he knew something had gone wrong. He rode out into it to find you. My pa tried to stop him, said it was suicide, but Mr. Foster said he would not leave his future wife to freeze to death if there was any chance of finding her." The weight of what Warren had risked for her, a woman he had never met, settled over Rebecca like a blanket. He could have died in that storm. He probably should have died, riding out alone into that white hell. But he had found her anyway, had carried her through miles of blizzard to bring her home. "Where is he now?" Rebecca asked. "In the barn, checking on the animals. He will be back soon." Rosalie hesitated, then added, "He sat in that chair by your bed all night, watching to make sure you were breathing proper, that you did not take fever. He is a good man, Miss Hartford. I hope you will be happy here." After Rosalie left, Rebecca finished her breakfast and then struggled out of bed, testing her weight on her injured ankle. It hurt, but she could hobble if she was careful. She made her way to the window and looked out at a world transformed by snow. Drifts reached halfway up the barn, and the sky was still heavy with clouds promising more to come. Everything was white and gray and cold, so different from the desert landscape she had imagined. The door to her room opened again, and Warren appeared, knocking even as he entered. "You should be resting," he said, though there was no censure in his voice. "I have been resting," Rebecca replied, "and I wanted to see the ranch, even if it is buried in snow." Warren crossed to stand beside her at the window, and Rebecca was suddenly very aware of him, of his height and breadth, of the way he smelled of horses and hay and cold wind. "It does not usually look like this," he said. "In a few weeks, when the snow melts, I will show you the view from the East Ridge. You can see for 50 miles all the way to the mountains." "I would like that," Rebecca said softly. Then, gathering her courage, she turned to face him. Rosalie told me you rode into the storm to find me, that you sat up all night watching over me. I do not know how to thank you for that, for saving my life." Warren looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "You are my responsibility now. That is what I signed on for when I sent those letters, when I asked you to leave your whole life behind and come to me. I take my responsibility seriously." "Is that all I am?" Rebecca asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. "A responsibility?" For a long moment, Warren just looked at her, his gray-blue eyes searching her face. "I do not know yet," he said finally, his honesty stark and somehow more comforting than any pretty words would have been. "I hope you will be more than that. I hope we will build something real together, something good. But we are strangers, Rebecca. We have exchanged letters and survived a blizzard together. But that does not make us know each other, not really." "No," Rebecca agreed, "but it is a start." "Yes," Warren said, something easing in his expression. "It is a start." The storm finally broke on the third day, leaving behind a landscape sculpted by wind and cold. The snow was deep enough that the town remained cut off, but Warren's cattle were safe in the sheltered valleys where he had driven them before winter set in, and his small herd of horses had weathered the storm in the barn. Life on the ranch settled into a rhythm as Rebecca's ankle healed and she learned the routines of her new home. Warren was a man of few words but consistent actions. He rose before dawn to tend the animals, returned for breakfast that Rosalie prepared, spent his days repairing storm damage and caring for his stock, and came back at sunset exhausted but never too tired to ask Rebecca about her day, to share details of his own. He was courteous to the point of formality, careful never to touch her except when helping her navigate the icy paths between house and barn, always knocking before entering a room she occupied. Rebecca found herself drawn to him despite the strangeness of their situation. She watched the way he was gentle with his horses, patient with Rosalie's younger brothers who came to help with chores, generous with the family that lived down the road and depended on him for work. She saw how he studied the sky and the land with a stockman's eye, how he planned for seasons ahead, how he had built this life through sheer determination and hard work. But she also saw his loneliness, the way he sometimes stood at the window looking out at his land with an expression that spoke of years spent alone. She heard it in the silences that fell between them, in the careful way he kept a physical distance as if afraid to presume anything. They were supposed to be married, supposed to be building a life together, but neither of them seemed to know how to bridge the gap between the people they had been in their letters and the reality of living under the same roof. 2 weeks after the blizzard, when Rebecca's ankle had healed enough for her to walk without limping and the roads had cleared enough for travel, Warren brought up the subject neither of them had mentioned since the night he carried her through the storm. They were sitting at the table after supper, Rosalie having already left for the night. The fire crackled in the hearth, and outside the stars were brilliant in the cold, clear sky. Warren turned his coffee cup in his hands, a gesture Rebecca had come to recognize as a sign he was gathering his thoughts. "The Reverend can come out from town next week," he said finally, "to perform the marriage ceremony. That is, if you still want to go through with it." Rebecca's heart began to beat faster. "Do you want me to?" Warren looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "I want you to do what is right for you. You have been through an ordeal, and I would understand if you wanted to return to Boston or to go somewhere else, make a different life. I would give you money for passage and enough to get established. You owe me nothing, Rebecca." "That is not what I asked," Rebecca said quietly. "I asked if you want me to stay, if you want to marry me." Warren set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "Yes," he said, and the single word held weight and conviction. "I want you to stay. I want you to be my wife, but I will not hold you to an agreement you made before you knew what you were agreeing to. These weeks, living here, seeing what life is like on a Nevada ranch in winter, that is the reality you would be committing to. Not the pretty words in letters, not some romantic notion of the West. This is hard country, Rebecca, and it is a hard life. I will not mislead you about that. Rebecca considered her words carefully before speaking. You are right that I did not know what I was agreeing to. I thought I understood, but there is a difference between reading about something and living it. These weeks have shown me that. She saw something that might have been disappointment flicker across Warren's face, but she continued before he could speak. They have also shown me that I'm stronger than I knew, that I can learn new skills and adapt to new circumstances, that I'm not afraid of hard work or difficult conditions. She paused, then added softly, and they have shown me that you are a good man, Warren Foster, an honest man who keeps his word and treats people with respect, a man I could trust with my life because you have already proven that I can, a man I think I could build something real with if you are willing to be patient while we figure out how to be partners instead of strangers. Warren's expression transformed, hope and relief mingling with something deeper that Rebecca did not yet have a name for. I am willing, he said. I have been alone for a long time, Rebecca. I know it will take time to learn each other, to build trust and affection. But I meant what I said in my letters. I am looking for a partner, someone to share this life with, someone to talk to in the evenings and wake up beside in the mornings, someone to help me turn this ranch into something that will last, something worth passing on to children someday. If you are willing to try for that, then I am willing to do whatever it takes to make you happy here. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes, the first she had shed since the stagecoach overturned. Then yes, she said, tell the Reverend to come next week. I will marry you, Warren Foster, and I will do my best to be the partner you deserve. Warren stood and came around the table, and for the first time since that night in the storm, he reached for her deliberately, taking her hands in his. His hands were rough with calluses, warm and strong, and Rebecca held on to them like an anchor. I will do my best for you too, Warren said solemnly. I promise you that, Rebecca. Whatever happens, I will always do right by you. Then slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, he bent and pressed a kiss to her forehead. It was chaste and gentle, a promise rather than a passion, but Rebecca felt it warm through her entire body. When he straightened, she saw color in his cheeks and a softness in his eyes that had not been there before. I should let you rest, he said, releasing her hands reluctantly. Morning comes early. It always does, Rebecca agreed, but she was smiling as she said it. That night, lying in the bed that would soon be hers to share with Warren, Rebecca thought about the path that had brought her here. The desperation that had driven her to answer a matrimonial advertisement, the fear and hope that had warred within her during the long journey west, the terror of the storm and the miracle of Warren finding her in all that whiteness. She thought about the man sleeping in the next room, the rancher who had risked his life for a bride he had never met, and who now offered her a future built on honesty and hard work rather than flowery promises. It was not what she had imagined when she left Boston. But as she drifted towards sleep, Rebecca found herself grateful for the reality instead of the dream. Dreams were insubstantial things, easily shattered by the first touch of cold wind. Reality was Warren's steady presence, the warmth of this house he had built with his own hands, the challenge of a life that would demand everything she had to give but might offer something precious in return. The Reverend arrived on a cold, clear Thursday morning, riding out from Cherry Creek with his Bible and his best coat. His name was Reverend Samuel Hart, and he was a weathered man in his 50s who had served the scattered ranches and mining camps of Nevada for over 20 years. He had kind eyes and a practical manner that suggested he had presided over many unusual weddings and was not easily shocked by the circumstances of frontier life. Rosalie and her family arrived shortly after, the women carrying dishes for a wedding feast while the men shook Warren's hand and clapped him on the back with genuine affection. Rebecca was introduced to them properly for the first time, having only glimpsed them briefly during her recovery. Rosalie's father was Marcus Fletcher, a man in his 40s with the same dark hair as his daughter and eyes that assessed Rebecca with careful interest. His wife, Lucinda, was a plump woman with a warm smile who immediately took Rebecca's hands and welcomed her to the territory. "We are so glad you survived that terrible storm," Lucinda said. "When Warren came to fetch Rosalie that night, my heart nearly stopped. I thought for certain you had both perished. It was a miracle, nothing less." "Warren's skill," Rebecca corrected gently. "He knew the land well enough to find his way even in that white blindness." "Skill and determination," Marcus agreed, "and more than a little luck, if I am honest. But you are here, and that is what matters. Warren has been a good friend to our family. I'm happy to see him finding some happiness for himself." The house was small for a gathering, but no one seemed to mind the crowding. Rosalie and her mother had transformed the simple main room into something approaching festive, with candles and winter greenery brought in from the hills. Rebecca dressed in the best dress she had brought from Boston, a simple gown of dark blue wool that Lucinda helped her arrange. She had no veil, no flowers, no trousseau beyond the few items she had managed to carry in her satchel, but looking at herself in the small mirror, Rebecca thought she looked well enough. Her face had filled out a bit in the weeks of regular meals, and her eyes were bright with nervous anticipation. Warren cleaned up well, appearing in a suit that was slightly too tight across the shoulders, suggesting he had owned it for years and had grown into his rancher's build since last wearing it. His hair was neatly combed, his jaw freshly shaved, and when he saw Rebecca, something in his expression made her breath catch. It was not just appreciation, though that was there. It was something deeper, a kind of wonder that she was real, that this was actually happening. Reverend Hart positioned them before the fireplace, the small gathering of friends and neighbors arranged around them in a semicircle. The ceremony was brief, the traditional words taking on new meaning as Rebecca listened to them in this context, in this place so far from everything familiar. When Warren took her hand to slip a simple gold band onto her finger, his hand was steady even though she could feel the slightest tremor in it. "I, Warren Foster, take you, Rebecca Hartford, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his voice low but clear, "to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part." Rebecca's own voice shook slightly as she repeated the vows, promising her life to this man she was only beginning to know. But when she said the words, she meant them. She meant them with a sincerity that surprised her, a commitment that went beyond practicality or gratitude. Somewhere in the weeks of recovery and quiet evenings by the fire, Warren had become more than a stranger offering refuge. He had become someone she respected, someone she wanted to know better, someone she could imagine building a future with. When Reverend Hart pronounced them husband and wife, Warren kissed her gently, mindful of their audience. It was a brief touch of lips, hardly more than the kiss he had pressed to her forehead weeks earlier, but Rebecca felt the promise in it. This was a beginning, the first page of a story they would write together. The celebration that followed was modest but genuine. Lucinda had brought a roasted chicken and fresh bread. Rosalie had made dried apple pie, and Marcus produced a bottle of whiskey that he swore was the finest in the territory. They ate and drank and toasted the newlyweds, and for a few hours the hard realities of ranch life were set aside in favor of joy and community. But eventually the neighbors departed, riding back to their own homes before darkness fell and the temperature dropped. Rosalie hugged Rebecca fiercely, whispering, "Be happy," before following her family out into the cold. Reverend Hart was the last to leave, clasping Warren's hand and telling him solemnly, "You have chosen well, my friend. May God bless your union with many years of happiness." Then they were alone, husband and wife, standing in the suddenly quiet house as the fire burned low. Rebecca's heart was racing, not with fear exactly, but with nervous anticipation. She was a married woman now, and there were certain expectations, certain duties that came with that state. Her knowledge of such things was limited to whispered conversations with other women, and a few terse explanations from a book her father had given her the year before he died. Warren seemed to sense her nervousness. He moved to stoke the fire, giving them both something to do with their hands. "It has been a long day," he said carefully. "If you're tired, we could just sleep. There's no rush for anything else." Rebecca appreciated his consideration, but she also knew that putting things off would only make them more awkward. "I am your wife now," she said quietly. "I understand what that means." Warren turned to look at her, his expression serious. "It means a lot of things, Rebecca. It means partnership and respect and working together to build a life. The physical part, that is important, yes. I hope we will have children someday, and I would be lying if I said I did not want that closeness with you. But I am not going to demand anything from you. When it happens, I want it to be because we both want it, not because you think it is your duty." The tightness in Rebecca's chest eased slightly. "I want to be a proper wife to you," she said, "but I am nervous. I do not have much experience with any of this." "Neither do I," Warren admitted, and Rebecca was surprised to see color rise in his face. "There have been women, a few when I was younger and would go into town, but nothing that meant anything, nothing that taught me much about how to be a husband. We will figure it out together if you are willing." Rebecca crossed to where he stood by the fire and reached for his hand. "I am willing," she said, echoing the words she had spoken at their wedding. "Show me, Warren, teach me. I trust you." The kiss that followed was different from the chaste touches they had shared before. It was deeper, more searching, Warren's hands coming up to frame her face with a tenderness that made Rebecca's eyes sting with sudden tears. She kissed him back inexpertly, learning the taste and feel of him, the way his breath caught when she touched her tongue tentatively to his lower lip. They made their way to the bedroom in silence, Warren banking the fire and blowing out the candles while Rebecca lit a lamp in the room that would now be theirs. Her hands shook slightly as she began to undress, but Warren's hands were steady as he helped her with the buttons she could not reach, his touch gentle and unhurried. What followed was awkward at times, clumsy in the way of two people learning each other for the first time, but it was also tender. Warren taking his time to make sure she was comfortable, murmuring reassurances when she tensed, finding ways to bring her pleasure even in her nervousness. When he finally joined their bodies, Rebecca held tight to his shoulders and breathed through the discomfort, finding that it was not as painful as she had feared, and that the closeness of it, the intimacy of being connected to another person so completely, held its own strange beauty. Afterward, they lay together in the darkness, Warren's arm around her shoulders and Rebecca's head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Outside, the wind had picked up, but inside they were warm and safe and no longer alone. "Thank you," Warren said quietly, his lips against her hair, "for trusting me, for staying, for giving this a chance." Rebecca tilted her head to look up at him, seeing his face in the faint moonlight that filtered through the window. "Thank you for finding me in the storm," she replied, "for carrying me home, for being patient while I learned what home means." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's warmth, and when Rebecca woke in the deep hours of the night, momentarily disoriented, Warren's arm tightened around her instinctively, keeping her close even in sleep. Rebecca smiled and settled back against him, closing her eyes and drifting back toward dreams of spring, when the snow would melt, and she could finally see the land she had married into in all its desert glory. Winter slowly gave way to early spring, and Rebecca learned the rhythms of ranch life with determination and growing confidence. She learned to milk the cow that Warren kept for household use, to gather eggs from hens that pecked at her hands until she learned to be quick, to churn butter and bake bread in the temperamental cast iron stove. She learned to read the weather in the color of the sky and the behavior of the animals, to tell when a storm was coming or when the winds would bring warmth from the south. She also learned her husband. Warren was a man of habits and routines, rising before dawn and working until his body demanded rest. He was quiet but not cold, thoughtful rather than distant. He showed his affection through actions rather than words, appearing at her side when she struggled with a heavy bucket of water, teaching her to ride the gentle mare he had selected especially for her, sitting with her in the evenings to plan the garden she would plant once the ground thawed. Their physical relationship deepened as well, the initial awkwardness giving way to something warmer and more comfortable. Warren was an attentive lover, learning what pleased her and taking his time to ensure her satisfaction. Rebecca found herself looking forward to the nights in their bed, to the closeness and the pleasure and the quiet conversations that followed. By the time the snow had melted and the first green shoots appeared in the valleys, Rebecca realized with some surprise that she was happy, not just content or resigned to her circumstances, but genuinely happy in a way she had not been since her mother died when she was a girl. The work was hard, certainly harder than anything she had done in Boston, but it was satisfying in a way her old life had never been. Here, her efforts produced visible results. The bread she baked fed them. The garden she planted would provide vegetables for the winter. The chickens she tended produced eggs to eat and sell in town. She was building something, contributing to something larger than herself, and it gave her days a purpose and meaning she had craved without knowing it. Warren seemed to sense the change in her. One evening in early May, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, he reached for her hand and laced his fingers through hers. "You are smiling more," he observed. "You look happy." "I am happy," Rebecca confirmed. "Is that surprising?" "Yes," Warren said honestly. "When you first arrived, I thought you might come to hate it here. Hate the isolation and the hard work and the strangeness of it all. I thought you might regret answering my advertisement." Rebecca squeezed his hand. "I will admit there were moments, especially in those first weeks when I questioned my decision, but not anymore. This is my home now, Warren. You are my home. I cannot imagine being anywhere else." Warren turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. "I love you," he said, the words simple and direct. "I did not think I would, not this soon, maybe not ever. I thought we would build a partnership based on mutual respect and shared work, and that would be enough. But somewhere along the way, you became more than my partner. You became the person I think about when I am out checking the herd, the person I hurry back to at the end of the day, the person I cannot imagine my life without. I love you, Rebecca, and I wanted you to know that." Tears pricked Rebecca's eyes, but they were happy tears. "I love you too," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I think I started falling in love with you that first night when you carried me through the storm. But I know I love you now, completely and without reservation. You have given me a life I never dreamed of, Warren, a home, a purpose, a future. But most of all, you have given me yourself. And that is the greatest gift I have ever received." Warren pulled her close and kissed her deeply, and Rebecca melted into him, tasting salt from her tears and feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart against hers. When they finally pulled apart, the sun had set, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Come inside, mon risqueuse," Warren said softly, standing and pulling her up with him. "I want to love my wife properly." Rebecca laughed and let him lead her back into the house, closing the door on the night and the vast Nevada landscape beyond. Inside, in their bed, they loved each other with the passion and tenderness of two people who had found what they had been searching for without even knowing they were searching. The summer passed in a blur of hard work and quiet joy. The garden Rebecca had planted flourished under her care, producing more vegetables than they could eat so that she was able to trade the surplus in town for goods they needed. The cattle thrived on the summer grass, and Warren was able to sell several head at good prices, giving them a financial cushion that eased some of the constant worry of ranch life. Rebecca learned to shoot a rifle well enough to kill the occasional rattlesnake, and to sew well enough to mend their clothes and make curtains for the windows that transformed the house from a bachelor's residence to a proper home. She also learned about the small community of Cherry Creek, making friends with the women in town, and earning a reputation as someone who could be counted on in times of trouble. When Lucinda Fletcher took ill with fever in July, Rebecca spent a week caring for her, nursing her through the crisis with the same determination she brought to everything else. When the school teacher broke her leg in a riding accident, Rebecca stepped in to help teach the younger children until the woman could return to her duties. Warren watched his wife integrate herself into the community with quiet pride. He had hoped for a helpmate, someone to share the burdens of ranch life. What he had gotten was a force of nature, a woman who threw herself into every challenge with fierce determination and surprising competence. More than that, he had gotten a true partner, someone whose opinions he valued and whose presence made even the hardest days bearable. In late August, Rebecca began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Warren, not wanting to raise his hopes prematurely. When she finally revealed her suspicion on a warm evening after supper, Warren's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He pulled her into his arms and held her tight, his face buried in her hair, and she felt him tremble with emotion. "Are you certain?" he asked, when he finally released her enough to look at her face. "As certain as I can be without a doctor's confirmation," Rebecca said. "My monthly courses have stopped, and I have been sick in the mornings for the past 2 weeks. I think there is a baby, Warren. Our baby." Warren's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "A baby," he repeated, as if testing the reality of it. "We are going to have a child." "Yes," Rebecca confirmed, her own voice unsteady. "In late winter or early spring, I think. March or April, if my calculations are correct." Warren placed his hand carefully on her still flat stomach, his touch reverent. "A baby," he said again. Then he looked up at her, his expression fierce with love and determination. "I will take care of you, both of you. I swear it, Rebecca. You will have everything you need, the best care I can provide." "I know," Rebecca said softly. "I trust you completely, Warren. We will do this together just like we do everything else." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall, Rebecca's body changing in ways both wondrous and uncomfortable. Warren was attentive to the point of being overbearing, constantly worrying about her lifting too much or working too hard. Rebecca bore his concern with patience, understanding that it came from love even when it chafed at her independence. As winter approached again, Rebecca could not help but think about the blizzard that had brought her to this life. She stood at the window one evening watching the first snow of the season fall in gentle flakes so different from that terrifying storm, and thought about the woman she had been then. Frightened, uncertain, desperate for a life better than the one she was leaving behind. She had gotten that better life, but in ways she never could have imagined. Warren came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her expanded waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "The storm," Rebecca said. "The day I arrived. How terrified I was and how strange it felt to be carried through the snow by a man I'd never met." "I was terrified too," Warren admitted. "I knew I was taking a huge risk riding out in that storm, but I also knew I could not live with myself if I did not try to find you. And when I did find you, when I saw you trapped in that overturned coach, I knew I would do whatever it took to save you." "Why?" Rebecca asked, turning in his arms to face him. "You did not know me. I could have been horrible, shrewish, lazy, any number of things, yet you risked your life for someone you had only exchanged letters with." Warren considered the question seriously. "I suppose I felt responsible. You had left your entire life behind based on my letters, my promises. If you died because of that, it would have been my fault. But it was more than just responsibility. Your letters showed me someone brave and honest and willing to take chances for the possibility of something better. I wanted to meet that person. I wanted to give that person the life I had promised. And once I found you, once I held you in my arms, I knew I wanted you to live, not just because I felt obligated, but because I wanted to know you, to see if we could build something real together." "And have we?" Rebecca asked, though she knew the answer. "Yes," Warren said, without hesitation. We have built something more real and more wonderful than I ever dared to hope for. You have transformed my life, Rebecca. This house, this ranch, all of it means something now because you are here to share it with me. And soon we will have a child to love and raise and teach about this life we have built. I could not ask for anything more. Rebecca reached up to cup his face in her hands. I love you, Warren Foster. I thank God every day for that storm, for bringing me to you, for giving me this life. They kissed gently, mindful of her swollen belly between them, and then stood together watching the snow fall, grateful for the warmth and safety of their home and the love that had grown between them like something planted in good soil and tended with care. Rebecca's labor began on a cold March evening, 3 days after a late-season snowstorm had buried the ranch in fresh powder. Warren immediately rode out to fetch Lucinda Fletcher and the midwife from town, a woman named Martha Gray who had delivered half the babies in the territory. By the time they arrived, Rebecca's contractions were coming hard and fast, and she was grateful for their experienced presence. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the following day. Warren paced outside the bedroom door, helpless and terrified in a way he had not been since the day he rode into the blizzard to find Rebecca. He could hear her cries of pain, could hear the low voices of the women encouraging her, and he felt utterly useless. All his strength, all his skills meant nothing in the face of this. He could only wait and pray and trust that the women inside knew what they were doing. Finally, as the sun was beginning to set on the second day, he heard it. A thin, angry wail that was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Warren stopped pacing and pressed his hands against the door, tears streaming down his face. A baby, his baby, Rebecca's baby. Their child was born. Martha opened the door a few minutes later, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son," she announced. "A healthy boy with good lungs and your stubborn chin. Come meet him." Warren entered the bedroom on shaking legs. Rebecca was propped up in bed, her hair damp with sweat, and her face pale with exhaustion, but her eyes were radiant as she looked down at the tiny bundle in her arms. When she looked up and saw Warren, her smile grew even wider. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Warren approached the bed as if in a dream. He looked down at the baby, at the tiny red face and the shock of dark hair, and felt something in his chest crack open with love so fierce it was almost painful. "He is perfect," Warren whispered. "You are perfect. Rebecca, I am so proud of you. You were so brave." "Hold him," Rebecca said, carefully transferring the baby to Warren's arms. "He should know his father." Warren took his son with trembling hands, supporting the small head as Rebecca had shown him. The baby's eyes were closed, his tiny fists waving aimlessly, and Warren felt the weight of responsibility settle over him like a physical thing. This small person would depend on him for everything, would look to him for guidance and protection and love. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "What should we name him?" Rebecca asked. They had discussed names for months but had never quite decided. Looking at his son now, Warren knew exactly what was right. "William," he said, "after your father. William Foster." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "He would have been honored," she said softly. "Thank you, Warren. William is perfect." They spent the rest of the evening together as a family, Warren refusing to leave Rebecca's side even when Martha and Lucinda urged him to rest. He sat in the chair beside the bed, watching Rebecca nurse their son for the first time, watching her face as she looked down at William with an expression of such complete love that Warren felt his own eyes sting with tears. "I never knew I could feel like this," Rebecca said quietly. "I love him so much already, and he has only been in the world a few hours. How is that possible?" "I do not know," Warren said, "but I feel it too, and I feel it for you, even more now than before. You gave me this, Rebecca. You gave me a son, a family, everything I never knew I was missing until you arrived in that blizzard." "We gave each other everything," Rebecca corrected gently. "This life, this family, It is ours together. You saved me that day, Warren, but I think in some ways I saved you too. We saved each other. Warren reached for her hand and brought it to his lips. Yes, he agreed. We saved each other. And now we have this little one to love and protect and raise together. We are a family, Rebecca. A real, true family. The spring passed in a blur of sleepless nights and the constant demands of a newborn. William was a healthy baby with strong lungs and definite opinions about when he should be fed and held. Rebecca was exhausted but radiant. Her entire world narrowed to the needs of her son and the steady support of her husband. Warren took on extra chores without complaint, doing what he could to ease her burden while still maintaining the ranch. The community rallied around them as well. Lucinda brought meals and helped with laundry. Rosalie, now 18 and courting the son of a neighboring rancher, came by several times a week to help with housework and to coo over the baby. Even the men stopped by with gifts for the child, hand-carved toys and soft leather moccasins and awkward but heartfelt congratulations. As William grew from a newborn to an infant who could smile and grasp at objects, Warren watched Rebecca blossom into motherhood. She was patient and loving, but also practical, refusing to panic over every small thing. She sang to William in the evenings, lullabies from her own childhood mixed with songs she made up on the spot. She talked to him constantly, narrating her day and telling him about his father, about the ranch, about the life they were building together. On their first anniversary, Warren gave Rebecca a gift he had been working on in secret for months. It was a small bookshelf he had built from fine wood he had special ordered from Carson City, with careful joints and a smooth finish that had taken him weeks to achieve. On the shelves, he had placed 3 books he had purchased from the store in town, novels he thought she would enjoy. Rebecca was speechless, running her hands over the smooth wood and carefully picking up each book to examine it. "Warren," she breathed, "this is beautiful. You made this?" "I wanted you to have something that was just yours," Warren said, suddenly shy. "I know most of your time goes to William and the house and helping me with the ranch, but I wanted you to know that I see you, Rebecca. I see the woman you are beyond being my wife and William's mother. I wanted you to have something that would feed your mind, that would give you pleasure beyond the daily work." Rebecca set down the book and crossed to him, wrapping her arms around his neck and kissing him with fierce tenderness. "Thank you," she whispered against his lips, "for seeing me, for knowing me, for loving all of me, not just the parts that serve you. I love you so much, Warren. More every day." That night, after William was asleep in his cradle and the house was quiet, they made love with the passion and intimacy of 2 people who had learned each other's bodies and hearts completely. Rebecca was grateful that her body had healed from childbirth, that she and Warren could reconnect in this way that had always been so important to their relationship. Afterward, lying in his arms, she felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were droughts that tested the cattle and their finances, winters that seemed endless, summers that scorched the earth and dried up the creek. Warren broke his leg in a fall from a horse and spent 6 frustrating weeks unable to work while Rebecca managed the ranch with the help of Marcus Fletcher and his sons. Rebecca suffered a miscarriage 2 years after William was born, and they both grieved the loss of the child who would never be. But through it all, they had each other. They had the partnership they had promised to build, the love that had grown from awkward beginning to deep roots. They had William, who grew into a sturdy boy with his father's eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. And when Rebecca became pregnant again and carried the baby to term, they had a daughter they named Rose, who completed their family in ways they had not known needed completing. Warren taught William to ride and rope and read the land the way his father had taught him. Rebecca taught both children to read and write and do their sums, determined they would have education even in this remote place. Together they taught their children about hard work and integrity, about treating people with respect regardless of their station, about the value of community and the importance of helping neighbors. The ranch prospered slowly but surely. Warren expanded his herd and bought more land until the small 200-acre spread had grown to over 1,000 acres of Nevada range. He hired more men to help with the work, and Rebecca managed the household accounts with the same skill she had once used to help her father with his business. They were never rich, but they were comfortable with enough to provide for their children and to put money aside for the future. On their 10th anniversary, they stood together on the East Ridge that Warren had promised to show Rebecca that first winter. The children were with Lucinda for the day, giving Warren and Rebecca a rare afternoon alone. The view was just as spectacular as Warren had promised. Miles of desert and scrubland stretching to distant mountains that shimmered in the heat. "Do you remember when I carried you through the blizzard?" Warren asked, his arm around Rebecca's shoulders as they looked out over the land. "Every detail," Rebecca said. "I remember thinking I was going to die, and then your face appeared at the window like a miracle. I remember the feeling of your arms around me, the way you kept me warm, the sound of your voice telling me to hold on. I remember thinking that if this was the man I was supposed to marry, then maybe I would be all right after all." "You were right," Warren said, pulling her closer. "You have been more than all right. You have been magnificent, Rebecca. You took this rough place and made it a home. You took a lonely man and gave him a family. You took a life that was just existing and made it worth living." Rebecca leaned her head against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, of sun and sage, and the faint hint of the soap she made every spring. "You did the same for me," she said. "I was running when I answered your advertisement, Warren, running from a life that held nothing for me. From poverty and loneliness and the terrible feeling that I would never matter to anyone, but you made me matter. You saw me, really saw me, and loved me anyway. You gave me purpose and partnership and a love I never dreamed I would find. Everything good in my life started the day you carried me through the snow." Warren turned to face her, his hands coming up to frame her face the way he had on their wedding night. "I love you, Rebecca Foster, more than I can ever find words to say. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I thank God every day for that blizzard that brought you to me." "I love you too," Rebecca said, her voice thick with emotion. "Always, Warren, for as long as I live and beyond." They kissed there on the ridge, with the Nevada sun beating down and the wind whispering through the sage, two people who had found each other through chance and courage and had built something lasting through love and determination. Below them, the ranch spread out like a promise kept, and beyond that, the small house where their children waited, the life they had created together against all odds. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their growing children. William grew tall and strong, a natural horseman with his father's quiet competence and his mother's quick mind. By the time he was 15, he was working alongside Warren as a full partner, managing sections of the ranch with a maturity beyond his years. Rose, 2 years younger, was a whirlwind of energy and curiosity, equally comfortable helping her mother in the garden or riding out with her father and brother to check the herds. Rebecca's hair began to show threads of silver, and Warren's face grew more weathered with each passing year, but the love between them only deepened. They had weathered storms both literal and figurative, had faced losses and celebrated triumphs, had built a life that was richer than either had imagined possible. The ranch was now one of the most successful in the territory, known for quality cattle and fair dealing. They added to their home over the years, building an additional bedroom for the children and a proper parlor for receiving the increasing number of visitors who came to discuss business or simply to share a meal with the family known throughout the region for their hospitality. Rebecca's garden expanded to include fruit trees and berry bushes, and she became known for her preserves and pies, which won ribbons at the county fair. Cherry Creek itself grew from a rough mining town into a proper community with a school, a church, and even a small newspaper. Warren served on the town council, and Rebecca helped organize a ladies' aid society that supported families in need and raised funds for community improvements. They were respected members of the community, their opinions sought on matters both large and small. But for all their success and standing, the heart of their life remained the same. It was in the quiet evenings spent on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains they had come to love. It was in the laughter around the dinner table, in the stories shared and the plans made. It was in the touch of hands in the darkness, in the whispered conversations late at night when the children were asleep. It was in the thousand small acts of love and service that made up a shared life. When William turned 18, he began courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sensible girl named Catherine, who reminded Rebecca of herself at that age. When he asked his parents' blessing to marry, both Warren and Rebecca gave it gladly, seeing in Catherine someone who would be a true partner to their son, the way Rebecca had been to Warren. The wedding was held at the ranch on a beautiful June day, with half the territory in attendance. As Rebecca watched her son make his vows to his bride, she felt Warren's hand find hers and squeeze gently. She looked at him and saw her own thoughts reflected in his eyes. This was what they had built, what they had worked for. Not just a successful ranch or a comfortable home, but a family that would continue, a legacy that would endure. Rose at 16 showed no signs of settling down, much to the frustration of several young men in the area who vied for her attention. She had her mother's spirit and her father's stubbornness, and she announced at dinner one evening that she intended to become a teacher, to bring education to the scattered ranches and mining camps that still lacked schools. Warren started to object, worried about his daughter traveling alone through rough country, but Rebecca laid a hand on his arm and shook her head slightly. "She is like me," Rebecca said quietly. "She needs to find her own path, make her own choices. We raised her to be strong and independent. We cannot fault her for becoming exactly what we hoped she would be." Warren sighed but nodded, recognizing the truth in his wife's words. "You will take the Winchester," he told Rose, "and you will check in every week. Let us know where you are and that you are safe. Those are my conditions." Rose agreed readily, hugging her father fiercely. "I will make you proud," she promised. "Both of you. I will do good work. I swear it." "You already make us proud," Rebecca assured her, "every single day." As Rebecca approached her 40th birthday, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this place, this life. She thought about the frightened woman who had boarded a train in Boston, leaving behind everything familiar for the unknown promise of the West. She thought about the storm and the crash and the moment Warren's face had appeared at the window, offering salvation and hope. She thought about the years that had followed, the hard work and the struggles, the joys and the sorrows, the slow building of trust and love between two strangers who had become partners and then soulmates. She thought about her children, the legacy she and Warren had created, and she felt a deep sense of satisfaction and gratitude. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching another spectacular sunset, Rebecca said suddenly, "Would you do it again? If you could go back to that day 10 years ago, knowing everything that would happen, all the hard times and the challenges, would you still ride out into that storm to find me?" Warren did not hesitate. "Every single time," he said firmly, "I would ride through 1,000 storms to find you, Rebecca. Meeting you, marrying you, building this life with you. It has been the greatest privilege of my existence. I would endure any hardship, face any danger, for the chance to have what we have together." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes, even after all these years, still moved by her husband's declarations of love. "I feel the same way," she said softly. "I would board that stagecoach again and again, knowing the storm was coming, knowing the coach would crash, because it brought me to you, and you have given me everything I ever needed or wanted, a home, a family, a purpose, and a love that sustains me through every challenge. I am exactly where I am supposed to be, Warren. With you, always with you." Warren pulled her close, and they sat together in comfortable silence as the sky blazed with color and the desert cooled around them. The ranch was quiet, The cattle settled for the night, the horses dozing in the barn. Inside the house, the lamps would soon be lit for supper, and the evening routine would begin. But for this moment, Warren and Rebecca simply sat together, two people who had found each other against all odds and had built something beautiful and lasting through courage, determination, and abiding love. The years continued to unfold in their natural progression. William and Catherine had children of their own, 3 boys in quick succession who filled the ranch with noise and laughter. Warren taught his grandsons the same lessons he had taught their father, passing down the knowledge and skills that would enable them to carry on the family legacy. Rose completed her training and took a teaching position in a remote mining camp, sending letters home filled with stories of her students and her adventures. Rebecca and Warren entered their 50s with grace, their bodies showing the wear of hard work, but their spirits remaining strong. They had lived through boom times and busts, through droughts and storms, through losses that broke their hearts and joys that made them whole again. Through it all, they had each other, the partnership that had started as a practical arrangement and had grown into something profound and unshakable. On their 25th anniversary, the family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. William and Catherine came with their boys, now rough and tumble youngsters who worshipped their grandfather. Rose arrived from her teaching post, bringing with her a young surveyor she had been courting, a quiet man named Daniel who looked at her the way Warren still looked at Rebecca after all these years. The Fletchers came, Marcus now gray-haired but still strong, and Lucinda plumper but no less warm. Half the town turned out to honor the couple who had become pillars of the community. As Rebecca looked around at the gathering, at the faces of friends and family, at the children running and playing, at the ranch that had grown from a small homestead to a thriving operation, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was what she and Warren had built, what they had created from nothing but hope and hard work and stubborn determination to make their marriage work. Warren found her standing alone for a moment, watching the festivities with shining eyes. He slipped his arm around her waist and pulled her close. "Happy?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Beyond measure," Rebecca confirmed. "I look at all of this, at everything we have built and everyone we love, and I can hardly believe it is real. 25 years ago, I was a desperate woman answering a matrimonial advertisement with no idea what I was getting myself into. Now I am surrounded by family and friends, standing beside a man I love more than my own life, and I cannot imagine having lived any other way." 25 years, Warren mused. "It seems like both forever and no time at all. I still remember every detail of that first night carrying you through the storm, how small and cold you felt in my arms. I remember being terrified I would not make it back to the ranch, that I would fail you before we even had a chance. And I remember the first time you smiled at me, really smiled, and thinking that maybe, just maybe, we could make this work." "We did more than make it work," Rebecca said, turning in his arms to face him. "We made something beautiful. Warren, we made a life and a family and a love that will outlast us both. Our grandchildren will tell their grandchildren about us someday, about the mail-order bride who arrived in a blizzard and the cowboy who carried her through the snow. They will tell them it was the beginning of everything, and they will be right." Warren cupped her face in his hands, these hands that were gnarled now with arthritis but still steady when it mattered. "I love you, Rebecca Foster," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have loved you for 25 years, and I will love you for however many years God grants us yet. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I thank him every day for sending that blizzard that brought you into my life." "And I love you," Rebecca replied, tears streaming freely down her face now. "You saved me, Warren. In every way a person can be saved. You gave me a life worth living and a love worth having. Everything I am, everything I have become, started the moment you found me in that overturned stagecoach. You carried me home, and I have been home ever since." They kissed there in front of God and family and friends, and the gathering erupted in cheers and applause. But Warren and Rebecca barely heard it, lost in each other the way they had been from the beginning. Two souls that had found each other against all odds and had chosen each other every day since. The celebration continued late into the night, with music and dancing and stories told around the fire. Rebecca danced with her husband, with her son, with her grandsons who stepped on her toes and giggled with delight. She laughed with Lucinda and embraced Rose's young man, giving him her blessing and seeing in his eyes the same devotion Warren had always shown her. She accepted congratulations and well wishes from neighbors and friends, people whose lives had been touched by her kindness and Warren's integrity over the years. As the guests finally began to depart and the family settled in for the night, Warren and Rebecca found themselves once again alone on the porch, looking out at the stars that blazed overhead in the clear Nevada sky. The sounds of their grandchildren being put to bed drifted out through the open windows, and inside William and Catherine moved about quietly, cleaning up the remnants of the celebration. "This is what it was all for," Warren said softly. "This moment, this life, this family. When I sent that advertisement to the Boston newspaper, I was just a lonely man hoping for companionship. I never imagined I would find this." "Neither did I," Rebecca admitted. "I was desperate and afraid, willing to try anything to escape a life that had become unbearable. I never imagined I would find happiness, let alone joy. But you gave me that, Warren. You and this land and this life we built together." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, content simply to be together as they had been for 25 years. Finally, as the night grew late and the cold began to seep in, Warren stood and offered his hand to Rebecca. "Come to bed, my love," he said gently. "Tomorrow is another day, and we have work to do." Rebecca took his hand and let him help her up, her joints protesting slightly but her spirit willing. "We always have work to do," she said with a smile. "But I would not have it any other way. This life, this work, it is ours, and I am grateful for every moment of it." They went inside together, hand in hand, closing the door on the night and the gathered stars. The house settled around them, warm and secure, filled with the presence of family and the memories of a quarter-century of love. In their bedroom, they prepared for sleep with the easy familiarity of long marriage. And when they finally lay down together, Rebecca curled into Warren's side as naturally as breathing. "Good night, my heart," Warren whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Good night, my love," Rebecca replied, her hand finding his in the darkness and holding tight. They fell asleep that way, as they had fallen asleep thousands of times before. Two people who had started as strangers and had become one through choice and commitment and abiding love. Outside, the wind whispered through the sage, and the stars wheeled overhead, bearing witness to a love that had been born in a blizzard and had weathered every storm since. The ranch would continue, passing from generation to generation, the land that Warren had claimed and Rebecca had helped tame. The story would be told and retold of the mail-order bride who arrived during the worst blizzard and the cowboy who carried her through the snow, of the love that grew from that desperate beginning into something that sustained them both for all their days. It was a story of courage and determination, of hard work and faith, of two people who took a chance on each other and built a life that exceeded their wildest dreams. But more than that, it was a story of love, real love, the kind that grows slowly and steadily like a tree sinking roots deep into difficult soil, the kind of love that weathers storms and droughts and all the challenges life throws at it, the kind of love that starts with a choice and becomes a commitment and eventually transforms into something so fundamental it is like the air you breathe, essential and life-giving. Warren and Rebecca Foster lived that love every day for the rest of their lives. They grew old together on the land they loved, surrounded by the family they had created and the community they had helped build. And when they finally passed, within months of each other, as often happens with couples who have been deeply bonded, they left behind a legacy not just of land and cattle, but of love and partnership and the unshakable belief that two people who commit to each other and work together can overcome any obstacle and build something beautiful and lasting. Their graves lie side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, with simple markers that bear their names and dates and one additional line, "Together through every storm." The ranch continues to thrive under the stewardship of their descendants, and the story of how it all began is still told on quiet evenings when the family gathers, a reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories start in the most unlikely ways. The blizzard that brought Rebecca to Warren was indeed one of the worst on record, talked about for generations afterward. But for the two people at the heart of this story, it was not a disaster or a tragedy. It was the beginning of everything, the storm that brought them together and set them on a path that would define both their lives. Warren carried Rebecca through the snow that day, but in the years that followed, they carried each other through all of life's storms, partners in every sense of the word, building a love that proved stronger than any wind that ever blew across the Nevada desert. And if you stand on that hill where they are buried and look out over the ranch they built together, you can still feel the echo of that love in the land itself, in the sturdy buildings and well-tended pastures, in the generations of family that followed, in the very soil that has been enriched by the sweat and tears and joy of two people who took a chance on each other and won more than they ever dared to hope for. This is the story of Rebecca and Warren Foster, of a mail-order bride and the cowboy who saved her, of a love that started in a blizzard and burned warm and steady for the rest of their lives. It is a story worth remembering, worth telling, worth believing in, because it reminds us that love, real and lasting love, is not about grand gestures or perfect beginnings. It is about two imperfect people choosing each other every day, working together through whatever challenges come, and building something beautiful from the raw materials of hope and determination, and abiding commitment to each other's happiness and welfare. Their story ended as all stories must, but the love they built together echoes on through the generations, a testament to what is possible when two people brave enough to take a chance find each other in the storm and decide to build a life together, come what may.